And welcome to another episode of Strange Planet. Great to have you on board, and thank you as always for sticking me in your ear. All right, for all of you George Adamski fans, this one's for you. Of course, George Adamski, recognized widely as the first and most famous of UFO contactees. He came to prominence during the 1950s. He was a philosopher, teacher, student, and saucer researcher. And we're going to get into his work, his theories, with my guest right now, all the way from Amsterdam. And after traveling the world as a backpacker, Gerard Aartsen settled in Amsterdam as a translator in 1985. In the late 1990s, Gerard trained as an educator and eventually earned his Master of Education degree from the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, where he still mentors students in their teaching practice in secondary schools. He's been a lifelong student of the Ageless Wisdom, which holds that at the beginning or end of each cosmic cycle or age, a teacher returns with a new revelation about the source and the evolution of consciousness that needs to be given expression by living according to the golden rule to essablish right human relations. Gerard has published 8 books, and his recent website, George Adamski, The Facts in Context, provides a unique insight into the relevance of George's teachings and missions at this pivotal time in humanity's history. And his latest book is called The Adamski Book of UFO UAP Disclosure. Gerard, welcome to Strange Planet. How are you?
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very doing good. Thanks. And the sun has been shining here today, so that's always good. I think more light after the winter.
That's right. The tulips will soon be coming forth, or are they already out?
I've seen a few tulips, but the daffodils are plentiful. They're everywhere.
Ah, wonderful. Well, we're a few weeks behind you, I think. It's winter's last gasp here, just north of Toronto. For those not intimately or not really aware of the work of George Adamski, I mentioned a little bit about him, but I guess maybe if you could take us back to the mid-1940s, when Adamski and some friends first claimed that they were, perhaps the first sighting, the cigar-shaped craft that he saw. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, their sightings started in the mid to late 1940s. He already had a 6-inch telescope in 1938 when he was still working as a metaphysics teacher in Laguna Beach. And he moved that along with his group of students to Valley Center, California, where a few years later they moved closer up to further up Palomar Mountain. And that's where their sightings started. His interest in space and extraterrestrial life was well established, but of course, with the Foo Fighters on the tails of jet fighters during the Second World War, basically started the modern UFO era, and these sightings became more specific with the what seemed to the eyewitnesses as large spacecrafts, cigar-shaped craft, and more specifically the what George Adamski coined or called the scout ships, the flying saucers as they became known. In 1947, the term, I believe, was first used in relation to Kenneth Arnold's sighting over Mount Rainier in Washington State, and of course with the crash in Roswell near the ranch near Roswell. Funnily, that was first excitedly reported by the head of the local military bases, U.S. Air Force base, And that same night, denied, or the next morning, um, by a general, because of course the secrecy that was imposed on the whole subject. We weren't supposed to know about um, visitors from space, especially because, as we know, the world was engaged in a massive ideological war, the Cold War between the United States and its allies and the Soviet Union, and all the available funds, or funds that could be made available without causing a popular protest or uprising, were diverted to the Cold War efforts of developing nuclear weapons. And that is the backdrop against which uh, George Adamski, as the first person to come forward and talk about his experience of meeting what he said was a man from a flying saucer that had landed in the California desert. But he was not the only one. There were various others, especially in the United States. Daniel Fry, I believe it was Daniel Fry, who whose book was published much later than Adamski's account came out, but he said he was first contacted in 1950. So it had been going on, like you said, rightfully, from the second half of the 1940s. Adamski became famous um, for his first contact in the desert that happened in November 1952. And he wrote an account about it that was published along um, Desmond Leslie's study of historical sightings, going all the way back to Old Testamentic times and the Hindu scriptures of Vimanas, etc. And it was published. They were published together as Flying Saucers Have Landed in 1953, and that was so.
Yeah, tell me
The
if
public
I
was
just.
so. Yes.
Sorry, I was going to just back up there a moment because you mentioned his contact in 1952 with the Venusian he called Orthon.
Right.
Can you just maybe unpack that experience a little bit and how his encounter, his contact with this Venusian Orthon, and what kind of information was exchanged?
Yeah, but Adamski and his group, they were living at the time in what was called Palomar Gardens, the area. They had a little roadside cafe there because the Hale Observatory at the Caltech Palomar Observatory that was finished in 19 whose construction was finished in 1949 drew a growing number of tourists, and that's how they made a living. Adamski, his wife, and a group of students running the roadside cafe. And of course, they were interested in the UFOs and the spacecraft. And on a hunch, on November 20th, 1952, he and six of his students, co-workers, set out for a picnic in the nearby Coxco Mountain desert area of California. Um, and it was around noon when they got out of the car and got the stuff out for the picnic, and they spotted a cigar-shaped craft. This was also noticed by the Air Force, and it was entered in Project Blue Book as sighting number 14, I believe. Um, and soon after having spotted the spacecraft, they saw flying saucers or saucer-shaped craft coming out of the mothership, the cigar-shaped craft. And soon enough, one of them had landed in the nearby foothills. Adamski went over, um, and his companions stayed by the roadside, but they could still see and witness what was going on at the distance. And according to Adamski's account, he spotted the saucer. He went over and was in awe of the site at the site of the saucer hovering just over the Earth's surface, and until he suddenly became aware that there was a man standing just outside the saucer, and through gestures and uh, telepathic communication. Um, he queried where the visitor was from, and he said he was from Venus, and um, asking for the reason for after the reason for their visits. The visitor said that it was the nuclear tests, the nuclear bombs, and the nuclear tests that got the space visitors worried, and that was one of the main reasons for their coming.
There was some photographs taken while Orthon was there. Were there actual photos of Orthon himself, or just the craft?
No, there were some photographs taken um, of the area, and there's the first report of this encounter appeared 4 days later in the Phoenix Gazette, and it has one of the photographs of the saucer, which to me looks like it was ascending again, taking off. And later on, there were also some photos taken from a distance where through enhancements, digital enhancements, it appears that the saucer could be seen just from behind one of the hills, and the upper part of a man's body could be seen, but it's not clear at all. But it looks very intriguing with the enhancements. Without the enhancements, it's really not clear at all.
There were supposedly some plaster casts, however, taken of Orthon's shoe imprints, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, George Hunt Williamson, who was a contactee himself and who had been traveling the or South American continent in search of um, Native American lore about visitors. He was in Adamski's circle of friends at the time, and he was among the party that went into the desert with him that day, and he carried with him apparently some what do you call that plaster. Um, and when they discovered the imprints, the footprints of Orthon in the sand, they decided to take these casts, and they've been a source of speculation of what, because they are the footprints show various symbols not legible in our terms of language. So they have been a cause of widespread speculation, and I'm not sure even if they've been if if the key was found to translate it, but yeah, and there were also photos of the cast were also included in I don't know if it was Flying Saucers Have Landed or his next book, Inside the Spaceships, but
Uh,
and they can be easily found, I believe, also online.
so Orthon, refused to have himself photographed, but how did Adamski describe Orthon? What did he look like?
According to Adamski, he looked perfectly human, except much more beautiful in his words than, say, the average human being on Earth. Much higher grade of physical perfection, to use my own words. And he had apparently long blonde hair, wore a fairly tight-fitting space suit in one piece, it seemed, and boots, and perfectly human in in any other way. Four limbs, a trunk, and a head, and yeah. So it was a far cry from what we what science fiction writers have been trying to portray the potential space visitors as, no three heads, no green tentacles, and or what have you.
There is some controversy about the scout ship, Orthon scout ship that Adamski photographed. It's been described as the chicken brooder, which is, I guess, some sort of a device to incubate eggs. Someone said it suspiciously looked like a chicken brooder. Can you
Yes,
talk
and
about that controversy?
yes, it's in December 1953. So this was well over a year after his first contact in the desert. Adamski noticed a scout craft, a flying saucer, hovering over the Palomar premises, and he was lucky enough to take some close-ups. Um, and the funny thing is, he was, it was not just dismissed as a chicken brooder, but it was also the top of an Italian ice machine or a tobacco humidor. It was claimed to be a lantern, a 1930s lantern. And the funny thing is that these critics that try to dismiss his photos and discredit his photos never agreed on exactly what item he used to fake allegedly the photos of this spacecraft, whereas the uh, photography experts of his time who looked into the photographs and analyzed them, they agreed that either he photographed full-scale models, which would have been very implausible because of the enormous cost involved, or else they were the real thing. With his setup, with his cameras, it was not possible to photograph models, small-scale models. So ironically, the experts at the time agreed that they were the real deal, whereas the cynics and the critics never agreed on exactly what item it was that he used for allegedly faking his photos.
Gerard, we'll take a quick time out. We'll come back and discuss more of the work of George Adamski and Gerard's new book, The Adamski Book of UFO UAP Disclosure. Back with more in a moment. Stay with us. Every new season, we find a reason to improve our lives and our health. And C60 Evo organic edible oils deliver noticeable benefits quickly. A spoonful in the morning delivers energy and endurance all day long. And I sleep deeper and wake up feeling refreshed because C60 ESS60 works. Carbon 60 received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1996 when it was used for industrial applications. C60 Evo's ESS60 is a breakthrough technology upgrading C60 to be safe for human and pet consumption. ESS60 has been called a miracle molecule because of the physical and mental benefits people are enjoying. Their lab has a proven track record of 31 years and thousands of happy customers across the world, just like me. So treat yourself, your friends, and your family to C60 Evo and use my link, EVRS, to get 10% off your first order. Again, my link, EVRS, to get 10% off your first order. Gerard Aartsen is with us. The latest book is The Adamski Book of UFO UAP Disclosure. And we're talking about George Adamski. Talk to me. He started lecturing about UFOs in, I guess, around 1949. Just talk to me about what he was talking about and how these lectures were received.
There are no transcripts of his lectures at the time. I know he was invited to speak at clubs like the Rotary Club and things like that about his sightings. He wrote 2 articles for Fate magazine. That one was published in 1950, one was published in 1951, accompanied by his earliest photographs of spacecraft that he shot against the face of the moon. I don't know what exactly he was talking about. of course, he had written The Pioneers of Space and published it in 1949, and many have accused him of, just using his science fiction story, Pioneers of Space, and selling it as fact or non-fiction inside the spaceships. However, to his students, he always made a clear distinction between his travels in his trips on physical spacecraft and his earlier experiences, out-of-body experiences, which he described in Pioneers of Space. So I would imagine perhaps that he presented the reality of the visitors from space in his earliest lectures as a mixture of descriptions of his sightings and his out-of-body experiences. But that's pure speculation on my part because I wasn't there, and there are no transcripts of his earlier talks. Several of his later talks have been transcribed and published. He goes into detail in terms of his experiences with Orthon, but also on board the spacecraft that he was invited on from February 1953 onward.
Right. This is where he is taken on a trip to see the solar system, back to Venus, where apparently he was informed that he had been reincarnated. He also he talked about how all of the planets in the solar system were inhabited.
Right.
Now, this is back in the 1950s when we didn't know a lot about the the surface of the various planets and so forth. So this kind of leads us into your book, where you, the Adamski Book of UFO UAP Disclosure, where you get into some of the aspects of Adamski's book and cite evidence. You provide 7 exhibits. You say proves Adamski was correct about fundamental facts and notions. So let's get into that now. Where do you want to start with that?
Maybe the point that you touched on, the fact that in the 1950s we didn't know much about the surface of planets in our solar system, and it's very understandable that many people would be puzzled about as far as Adamski's claims about the other planets in our solar system being inhabited. While in the 1950s we didn't know much or hardly anything about the other planets in our solar system, in 2023 our astrophysics still doesn't know very much about 90% of the mass of the universe. Our astrophysical scientists tell us that, based on calculations of astrophysical calculations, they know that the mass of the universe is a certain amount, except there's 90% that they cannot pinpoint, they cannot find, and they've hypothesized dark matter and dark energy. And it is not just Adamski and other early contactees who assert that every planet in our solar system is inhabited. It's also the Ageless Wisdom teaching that was first reintroduced to the Western world through the work of Madame Blavatsky in the late 19th century. And her tenets about the nature of matter and the fundamental nature of consciousness, we now see being confirmed in quantum science. So there's this very interesting development going on in science where physically science isn't able to see and pinpoint what they know must be there. And at the same time, it's it's beginning to understand that physical matter isn't the be all and end all of what we call reality. So my contention is, and I back it up with quotes from Adamski, but also from the Ageless Wisdom teaching, and the latest findings in science, and especially systems science, which draws together findings from various scientific disciplines. That life on the other planets in our solar system perhaps may not have precipitated to the level of density that it has on our planet. Maybe we are the exception, not in the sense of being the only planet with life, but perhaps we are the exception in the sense that we are the only planet where life has precipitated to a dense physical level of carbon-based life forms, which doesn't make life where it manifests in subtler forms of matter any less real. It's just that it's outside our range of vision, just as infrared light is, or many frequencies in the sound spectrum are inaudible to us.
Gerard, we're going to take another time out. We'll come back and delve further into the Adamski book of UFO UAP disclosure. Gerard Aartsen, my guest. Stay with us. November reminds us to be thankful and focused on boosting our radiant health before winter. And I use a potent remedy that's improved the quality of my life and deepened my sleep as well. I take C60 Evo olive oil every morning, and I have a lot more energy and mental focus all day long. My workouts are easier, and I have a lot more endurance. If you're into competitive sports, this is a game changer. Health is our greatest wealth, and Pura C60 ESS60 really works. ESS60 is a breakthrough technology delivering the carbon-60 miracle molecule for humans and pets. Check out the C60 Evo holiday gift collections for everyone on your list. They make amazing skin, lip, and hair repair serum that deliver noticeable results quickly. C60 Evo's lab has an impressive track record of 31 years and, of course, my personal recommendation. You deserve the best remedies on Earth, and so do those you love. Buy direct from the lab and upgrade your life today. Use my code EVRS to save 10% off your first order. Again, my code EVRS and save 10% off your first order. And Gerard Aartsen stays with us. The latest book is the Adamski Book of UFO UAP Disclosure, available at all fine bookstores, Amazon, of course. I wanted to get back to, we talked earlier about the Venusian Orthon and his telepathic communication. I guess he also communicated with hand signals with Adamski. And of course, one of the concerns at that time, as you mentioned, the height of the Cold War, was nuclear weapons. And I'm not sure how closely you've been following this new Pentagon agency called the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, ARROW. And recently, last month, I guess, February 15th, I think it was, they interviewed Robert Salas, who,
finally,
as a 26-year-old lieutenant colonel, of course, was in a concrete bunker at Malmstrom Air Force, or Malmstrom in Montana, I guess it was, where they were, they had these ICBMs, nuclear weapons, and he witnessed these missiles being taken offline, 10 of them. And then there were other launch sites at Malmstrom where other people, officers, reported the same thing happening. And then they also, I believe, ARROW, that is, either have already or are planning to interview Dr. Bob, now I've forgotten his name.
Hastings?
No, not, this was,
Hastings.
he was, I'll just leave that one because I didn't. Okay, so let's just focus on Bob Salas. So this is now starting to come out. Now, 6 decades later, the Pentagon is finally interested in UFO incursions over, nuclear weapon sites. which is kind of, interesting that I guess Adamski was probably one of the first to talk about how these ETs were concerned about nuclear weapons, and now, of course, it's all coming to the fore. Just give me your impressions about this.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I was amazed in 2010 when Robert Hastings held his press conference in Washington D.C., where he presented 7 former or active military personnel, Robert Salas among them, as representing a group of over 120 military people who had all testified to very similar experiences as the one you just recounted from Robert Salas in his interview. I wasn't aware that he had recently been interviewed by Aero, but I'm glad that that he has been, because even in 2010 he stated that if the extraterrestrials had evil intentions or hostile intentions, they could have done a lot of damage, much more damage than deactivating the nuclear missiles, the intercontinental ballistic missiles. And well, of course, the striking thing is that this wasn't a one-off event. This happened several times with, like I said, presented by Robert Hastings, over 120 eyewitnesses. This cannot be a coincidence, and it can also not be a coincidence that George Adamski, in the very first report about his first contact, was told about the same concern among the visitors. So yeah, it's I think it shows that the extraterrestrial visitors do not have hostile intentions. They are concerned not only for our well-being, but also for their well-being, because nuclear destruction of planet Earth, or certain life streams on planet Earth, will reverberate around the solar system. Just because we do not understand how life is interconnected, even though we're beginning to get a sense of it through quantum science, with the non-locality of consciousness and entanglement of particles, which Einstein called the spooky action at a distance. Yeah, when particle here is affected, it has an immediate effect on a related particle on the other side of the universe. So everything is interconnected, and that is why the people from space are still very much concerned. It was only when was it? Let me check. Yes, August last year, when the United Nations Secretary General again warned against the idea, the rattling of nuclear sabers. He said, and nuclear blackmail cannot work, as we see it again now, being reignited in the Ukraine conflict on various parts. So it remains an issue of great concern, and of course, our survival is at stake. If by some miscalculation a few of the wrong buttons get pressed, it will mean the end of human life on this planet. And that may not seem like a big deal on the grand scale of the universe, but that's because we do not understand the importance, the significance of human life in the grand scheme of things. Human life is universal. That's another thing that Adamski was told. And it plays a pivotal role in the evolution of a planetary system. And it's a clearinghouse for consciousness as it becomes individualized, and someone once said that consciousness is life becoming aware of itself, and we see consciousness growing from the vegetable through the animal through the human kingdoms, but it doesn't stop there. It goes beyond the human kingdom, and we see that I believe in accounts of in Adamski's accounts and accounts of other contactees of these highly advanced extraterrestrial beings. There is no end to the evolution of consciousness, and the human kingdom is not only integral but also a pivotal aspect and part of that evolution. So there's a part for us in this grand scheme of things, the cosmic scheme of things, that we are not aware of, and it is at this crucial time in the it's why this time is a crucial time in the history of human evolution, is that we are beginning to become aware of that through the the reality of extraterrestrial visitors now becoming clear. It's been denied for 7 decades, but it's now becoming clear. The early photographs that Adamski took of a spacecraft against the face of a moon, it's almost reflected in the infrared recording from a board camera on a U.S. Navy jet fighter. So it's almost becoming undeniable now that the extraterrestrial presence is real. It's a reality, and George Adamski's, it was the nuclear concern you mentioned. There's also anomalous materials that I show in my book. Anomalous materials that Adamski had in his possession. He picked up from a site where a UFO had landed, a flying saucer had landed, and had analyzed. And now there's a Stanford professor, Professor Gary Nolan, who has been asked by the Pentagon to analyze very similar materials and much larger parts. There's the nuclear thing. There's the contact thing. Adamski says he was contacted by people from space. There's a growing number of scientists now. Most recently, it was the professor of astrophysics from Israel, Chaim Eshed, in December 2021, who made the international headlines stating that extraterrestrials are here, but they've asked not to be revealed because humanity is not yet ready. And it goes on. We can no longer deny the reality of the extraterrestrial presence, and it is especially at this time because we are now on the verge of an expansion of consciousness, where we will see that there's much more to life, much more to being a human being, much more to living on this planet than we have thus far understood.
I finally remembered the other. Getting back to that nuclear threat. It was Dr. Bob Jacobs.
Yeah.
He was stationed at Vandenberg. Well, it's now a Space Force base, but at the time it was an Air Force base. This was 1964, and he was in charge of videotaping the launch of these rockets that were carrying what they call dummy warheads. And he was using some sort of like a 200, I think it was a 20-inch, was it 20 inches or 200 inches wide telescope lens, and was videotaping through this telescope, and later discovered what he had captured on video. And this was a craft, as we see the rocket traveling like 8,000 miles per hour, and is starting to separate this 3 stages of the rocket. The cone comes off, it opens, the warhead, the dummy warhead comes out. We see this spacecraft come in, fire a beam of light at the warhead, then fires another beam of light at the various stages of the rocket, and it just completely fails and, I guess, crashes. And so Jacobs, if he hasn't already, will also be testifying before ARROW, the All-Domain Anomalous Resolution Office. There's an interesting Dutch connection with George Adamski. You're in Amsterdam. Was it Queen Juliana who received George Adamski back in the late 1950s? Tell me about that. How did that meeting happen?
Yeah. Um, George Adamski was invited to speak in, his books were so well read. People were so curious and interested in his accounts. We must remember that the psychological weight of this threat of nuclear annihilation was hanging over the world um, in the 1950s and well into the 60s and 70s. I remember it from my own childhood and days as a youth. Um, and so already in the 1950s, people were really interested in his information that he was asked to share about the need for international cooperation to avert the nuclear dangers and to solve our global problems. So his books were translated in many different languages, 12 at least. His first book was translated into 12 different languages at least within a few years. Um, and that spawned a massive interest and letters, questions coming in from all over the world, which led him to set up an international network of correspondence, the Get Acquainted program. And through that network, he was invited to speak in different parts of the world. And so a world lecture tour was organized, which brought him from the States to New Zealand and Australia, and then on to the UK and onto the European continent. And on his um, uh, uh, during his days in Holland in May 1959, he was invited to an audience with Queen Juliana at the time, the grandmother of our current king. Actually, the invitation was extended while he was still in Australia. Um, and the Queen was much criticized for inviting this fraud from California. But she was massively interested, and I believe the meeting was set for 45 minutes or something, but it lasted for 2 hours, which made Adamski late for his talk in The Hague later that day. Of course, it was a private audience, and no details were given out about what was said or asked, or how the Queen reacted. But Adamski later revealed that the Queen was very well pleased with the information that she received from Adamski. So yeah, it was quite extraordinary, and she was not the only high-ranking individual that contacted or was interested in Adamski's information. In Italy, there was the diplomat Alberto Perego, a consul. Um, he visited, even though many people contested based on false chronology and false claims about Adamski's own statements, but he had a private audience with Pope John the 23rd in May 1963. And he had contacts with the high level military people in Brazil and other in Mexico as well, I believe. So yeah, there was a professor in India of Banaras University, Professor Sisir Maitra, who was the main contact for the Get Acquainted program in his country. So yeah, lots of people of high standing were open to his information, despite the general ridicule and derision from the scientific and community, and later on even from people who present themselves as serious UFO researchers. They're still spurning Adamski's information, but if you see how much of his information and his claims are now being confirmed from military science and activists, it's amazing.
How do you think George Adamski should be remembered?
For me, he was the bravest of the 1950s contactees, and he deserves nothing but respect, and he's still very, very much underrated. The information that I've uncovered, and his teachings all show that he had a far greater understanding of reality than most people do now, even much revered UFO researchers. I think it would behoove many people to study his teachings and compare them with the latest insights from post-materialist science, system science, and quantum research.
The Adamski book of UFO UAP disclosure, Gerard Aartsen, my guest. Thank you so much, Gerard. Great to meet you.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, Richard. Thank you.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Subscribe at strangeplanetpodcast.com.